So you spent the time building up your muscle and it's time to cut. The last thing you want to do is lose the muscle you worked so hard to build. It's not only important for helping you look better, but having more muscle actually helps keep your metabolism running faster too. So today I'm going to show you how to keep your gains while you lose the body fat. Hey, this is Colin DeWaay. If you're looking to get in the best shape of your life, make sure you start that process now by subscribing and click on that bell notification so you don't miss anything. All right, let's get right into it today. And the first thing you need to consider to make sure you keep your muscle is to have plenty of patience. The faster you lose weight, the more likely you are to lose muscle during the process. So it's usually recommended to lose no more than about 1% of your total body weight on average per week. Understand that's on average, so you're going to lose less some weeks, you're going to lose more some weeks, but over time it should be no more than about 1%. So if you were 200 pounds, you don't want to lose more than about 2 pounds on average. Not only does this help you keep muscle, but also helps keep your metabolism in a better place, makes it less likely to regain body fat when you're done dieting, allows you to eat more food because you can keep your calories higher so you get more balance and flexibility, helps keep energy levels higher, performance higher, and just overall feel better so the process doesn't suck so bad. Another thing you want to do to make sure you're keeping your muscle is keep your protein intake high. Now you hear a lot of different opinions on how much protein to eat. One person will tell you 1 gram per pound of body weight. Another will say 1 gram per pound of lean body mass. Another person will say to use a goal weight. Don't get too caught up into it. Like, if you want to do everything you can to keep as much muscle as possible, I do recommend around 1 gram per pound. But the point is to make sure you keep your protein high, not only to keep muscle, but also to help with feeling more full. Protein has a high thermic effect of food, so you burn more calories from it. So don't freak out if you think you should be 10 grams higher or lower or anything like that. Keep it as high as you can reasonably hit, and then keep it high. Don't lower your protein as you lose weight. So even if you're doing 1 gram per pound, say you start at 180 pounds, so you're doing 180 grams of protein. Now you're 170 pounds. Don't lower it to 170. I recommend keeping that protein up. Now, as far as the rest of your calories coming more from either carbs or fats, make sure you stick around to the end of the video as I'll talk more about calorie and macro split considerations for when you start your cut as well as how to adjust. Though I will say this, when it comes to refeed studies, they generally do this mostly through carbohydrates, and keep in mind carbs are protein sparing. Which, speaking of refeeds, that's what I want to touch on next. Refeeds and diet breaks, and understand the difference between the two because this gets confused a lot. Refeeds are basically shorter periods of times where you increase calories, generally around rough maintenance calories, in maybe 1, 2, or 3 days, whereas a diet break is the same concept, only over a longer period of time, usually a week or 2 or even more. And to help illustrate how refeeds can help with muscle retention, I want to point to this study done recently by USF, where for 8 weeks they had one group in a 25% calorie deficit, and they kept that the same each day of the week through the length of the study, whereas the other group had 5 days at 35%, and then 2 days in a row on the weekend where they were eating around maintenance, so they got the same total calorie deficit over the course of the week. It was just either straight up calories or using a consecutive refeed approach. And by the end of the study, the group that had the same calorie restriction every single day lost about 3 pounds of lean body mass, whereas the group that did the consecutive refeed approach only lost on average about 1 pound of lean body mass, and also saw about half the metabolic drop compared to the other group. Now you may be thinking, well, hold on here, we're talking about not losing muscle while cutting, and even the refeed group lost a little bit of muscle. Yes, unfortunately, you're probably going to lose some muscle. It's to be expected. The point is we're trying to minimize it as much as we can, and understand too, you're never really going to know if you lost muscle or not. In fact, as you get in better shape, it actually looks like you're building muscle, and this is a common misconception people have, is you lose body fat, and now it looks like you have more muscle because you're displaying the muscle that was previously hidden by more body fat, so your muscles look bigger and more defined. Now, besides just using a refeed approach, which by the way, you do want to try to do a consecutive refeed approach whenever possible. It doesn't really appear like a single day refeed will do a whole lot in terms of your metabolism and helping retain lean body mass. It does have mental benefits, and also it's going to help refill glycogen storage, but it appears based on the little we know at this point that it takes more of a consecutive day refeed approach to really get the benefits from it. Now, when it comes to diet breaks where you're taking a week or more, we have the Manager study that looked at 16 weeks of just continuous continuous dieting versus 16 weeks of dieting, but split up into 2 weeks of dieting and 2 weeks of maintenance and repeating that. And the group that took the 2-week diet breaks lost much more body fat, retained more lean body mass, and retained their fat loss much better afterwards. However, consider that it was obese individuals who weren't previously resistance trained or anything like that, so it's not necessarily the same, but it can show that it's possible taking those breaks may help with muscle retention. And if nothing else, we know it's going to help with fueling performance, feeling better. And if you're able to do this, the chances of retaining your muscle can only go up, right? Now, the next thing that is often overlooked, and honestly, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated aspects of not only keeping muscle, but an overall healthy and fit lifestyle, and that is prioritizing your sleep. And that's whether you're in a building phase or in a cutting phase. Remember, you build muscle from recovering. You don't actually build the muscle in the gym doing the exercise. You do that, you get the muscle breakdown, and then you need to recover from that. And when you recover, that's when you actually build. So if you can't recover properly because you're not getting enough sleep, you're only harming your potential results. And this is something to keep in mind too, if you're that person who is just terrified of taking days off and feels like they need to go 7 days a week, go hard all the time and never back off, and then can't figure out why you never see results. And there are a couple studies I want to point to help illustrate this. The first one is where over a 14-day period, they had people sleep either 8.5 hours or 5.5 hours. Now keep in mind, these people were obese and not trained, but that doesn't mean it can't show the impact of the difference that sleep can have on muscle. And at the end of the study, both groups lost about the same amount of weight, which I believe was around 3 kilograms, which is roughly 6 or 7 pounds. But in the 8.5 hour group, the total amount of weight that was lost was 56% from fat. And in the group that only got 5.5 hours of sleep, they only lost 25% of their weight from fat, which means, yes, 75% of what they lost in weight came from lean body mass. Now keep in mind, lean body mass isn't just muscle, it's everything in the body that's not fat. So it doesn't necessarily mean it was all muscle, but certainly a good percentage of it. And on top of that, the 5.5 hour group also had much higher signals of hunger. And if you think about times where you typically make poor decisions against your best interest, it's usually when you're fatigued, you're tired, you're cranky, and almost every time you get into effort mode, it's when you're tired. So while we don't know, I think that we could probably safely say that it would not be as dramatic in terms of how much was lost in trained individuals, but it also shows you that if you don't sleep enough, there's a higher likelihood that you're going to lose more muscle than if you sleep more. And in another study, now this was only in 1 day of basically total sleep deprivation, they found in the group that had total sleep deprivation versus no sleep deprivation, there was an 18% reduction in muscle protein synthesis, a 24% decrease in plasma testosterone, and a 21% increase in cortisol. Now keep in mind, this is the acute response, and it doesn't appear that acute response means a whole lot, as it's more your total overall baseline levels. However, you could also argue when you do longer periods of time without sleeping, this is going to affect those overall levels. And if your muscle protein synthesis is down and your testosterone is down and your cortisol is up, not exactly a recipe you want for trying to keep your muscle. Another thing you want to make sure you're doing is keeping your training intensity up and not backing off now because you're not trying to build. And you also don't want to significantly change your training routine just because you're cutting. A lot of people will switch to high reps, low weight because they're cutting, and then low reps and high weight when they're building. Now, I could go on about this forever, and honestly, there's value in all rep ranges and styles when it comes to building and maintaining muscle, but you don't want to alter your training programming whether you're cutting or building. You're either just in a calorie deficit or in a calorie surplus, and you alter that through typically calorie changes as well as cardio changes, but your training stays relatively the same, and you want to make sure you keep training hard to keep that muscle. Keep it in mind, we don't only want to focus on weight, and this is especially true for someone who's more of a beginner. If you have a lot of training experience and you're into a cutting phase, now you know you're basically trying to maintain that muscle. If you're newer in a cutting phase, well, now you can potentially build muscle and lose fat at the same time, which is why we don't only look at weight, because you may see positive changes in body composition without a lot of changes in weight. So also make sure you're taking measurements, pay attention to pictures and how your clothes are fitting, as at the end of the day, it's not the number on the scale that really tells us the results or what we're after, it's a certain look. And please, 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 do not over diet, especially if you really care about muscle. You just can't keep dieting every time you get a little bit uncomfortable. I can't tell you how many people say, I really want to build and I can never seem to do it, but then every time they gain a couple pounds, they panic and go back into a diet again. Understand, muscle has weight. You add muscle to your frame, you have more body weight, plus to optimally build, you do want to be in a small calorie surplus to help fuel that and build more muscle. But when you keep dieting over and over again, you're keeping your hormones in a terrible spot, you don't give your body enough time to build, and every time you do diet down, your metabolism is so trashed from all that dieting, you don't see good results anyways, so we need to spend much more time not dieting than we do dieting. Now, I mentioned I was going to talk about how to adjust your macros through your cutting phase, and I also want to talk about how to set up your own diet breaks and really take you through the entire process from start to finish, and I have a video that already talks about this, so I'm just going to send you to this top video next, and it'll walk you through everything you need to know. Otherwise, I think you'll like this bottom video instead, and I'll see you over in one of those other videos.